now, and we're going to be starting with the Chinese room. So, hi Dan, could you?
Hiya.
Nice to see you. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. It's not raining, which is like the first time in a month, so it's pretty good.
I know it's glorious outside. I feel a bit weird wearing a sleeveless dress, but I'm making the most of it. Um, so, could you tell us maybe a little bit more about the Chinese room and what games you make and what you do there, please?
Sure. So we started off. We actually started off as a making mods for Half-Life 2 back in 2007, and became a sort of professional studio in 2012. We have sort of are probably best known for story-focused games, titles like Dear Esther, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs. We've also worked in mobile VR, and most recently we've shipped a 2.5D platformer for Apple Arcade called Little Orpheus. We used to be a small indie. We're about 15 people. We joined Sumo Digital back in 2018, and we're currently at just over 40 people. We have got a brand new, lovely, shiny office sitting completely empty in the centre of Brighton, which one day we hope we'll actually be allowed to go back to. But yeah, we work on original IP. We work across different platforms, so console, mobile, PC. We're currently at work on a couple of projects at the moment, which are unannounced. And yeah, I suppose that's kind of us really. I guess our focus is, as a studio, as I say, is very much on storytelling. We're very focused on audio, music, voice acting and dialogue, art and animation. Traditionally, we've not been very mechanically orientated. That's very much changing now as we're part of Sumo. As we're sort of ramping up and producing games that are more and more, I guess, traditional genres. We're trying to find ways of putting our own sort of very special spin on that.
Brilliant. And you mentioned there that you're part of Sumo Digital. Could you tell people a little bit about what Sumo Digital is and what that relationship is like?
Yeah. So Sumo are one of the actually largest UK games companies. I think we're now pushing over 1,000 people, I think across 12 studios, mainly in the UK. We also have a couple of studios outside that in the US and in Pune in India. Sumo have got 17, I think, plus years experience, mainly working in co-dev and work for hire. So they work with a range of partners across a range of different projects. So they're sort of made very significant contributions to things like Hitman. They've been looking after Little Big Planet for many years now, and probably most well known for karting games. And they've got arranged across their studios. They have some studios like Red Kite are a part of Sumo, who are very, very engineering focused. Some of the sort of like named studios that are mainly working on sort of co-dev up to the largest, which is Sheffield, which is about 330 people. And then there are other studios like us that are basically working on original titles. So we're independently managed. We basically make kind of our own strategic decisions in sort of like consultation with Sumo management, and then it's sort of down to us to deliver on those. And we share with all the other Sumo studios kind of central services, so stuff like marketing, HR, finance. And what it really works well for us is it means that we get to have the kind of scale of a large, mid to large sort of indie developer, and we still get to have all of that sort of ability to be very fast, to be very creative, to be very sort of geared around what we want to do. But we have all the security and support of being part of a larger organization. So in terms of people's jobs, there's like a more sort of security. If you're a 15-person indie studio, you tend to be quite hand to mouth, and it makes it quite hard when you are sort of like running from project to project. Being part of Sumo means that we have a much longer sort of like strategic sense of where we're going, and a much greater sense of security about how we get there. So it's kind of the best of both worlds for us, really.
Thank you. And you were talking there about how you create your own IP. And I was just wondering sort of if you could tell us a little bit about that process and how that affects maybe the sorts of roles that you look for, and perhaps how that is, maybe how that sort of creating your own IP is reflected in the culture at the Chinese room as well. Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it's very challenging working on your own IP. It takes a long time to get things spun up. I mean, I'm sure sort of like most people watching this are aware, you know, the majority of times when you're working in games, you're working with partners and publishers, and new IP tends to take a long time to get sort of secured, find the right partners for, and that sort of stuff. So it's really interesting because you kind of are often working on a project while you're trying to simultaneously find out what that project is and make sure that project is actually the project that you want it to be. So you are kind of forced necessarily into a very sort of like close-knit community of developers. You have to be very good at communication, very good at sort of like supporting each other, helping each other sort of like achieve the best they can. The disciplines tend to work very, very tightly together, and things can be very, very fast moving. So it's a very exciting area to work in because it has those challenges in it, and because you are in a situation where, particularly on a company our size, everybody working on a project has a visible contribution to that project. That you know, we're not. If you go up to sort of like the really large AAA companies where, you know, you have departments of the same game working in different countries who may never even speak to each other across the course of the 5 years it takes to develop. Our development cycles tend to be shorter, sort of around 2 years. There's 40 people basically working in the same room on the same project. So it really suits people that are sort of looking for that very sort of communicative, very sort of like type, very, very social type of development. Lots and lots of ideas floating around. I mean, in terms of the way we sort of work, we have our discipline leads who are all extremely experienced, and we'll sort of like talk and throw around ideas, sort of find something that we feel is heading in the right direction or should be interesting, do very rapid prototyping and iterating around that, involve other members of the team as and where we need it. So if we need some art, we need some animation, some audio, those people are pulled in to kind of work at it, as well as you're kind of kicking this thing backwards and forwards, getting it to a place where you go, okay, this definitely feels like it's a game that's got legs that we want to go out there, we want to talk to partners about. And then gradually the team is sort of like is built around that. So you have the kind of core people. You're always going to need a lot of engineers up front. You're always going to need a lot of designers up front. Artists tend to come on later. Specialist roles like animators, VFX, lighting artists can come on sort of like later as you kind of need those. But because we work like a lot of the sort of like larger studios, I suppose, I mean, say larger, we're very small in the grand scheme of things for game studios, but we have enough people that it means we can actually have those people on as full-time specialists. When we were working prior to Sumo, and there were about 15 of us, there was no way we could justify having things like lighting artists or animators. That was all handled freelance. And normally now we have a few of those people in-house, and then we also use freelance support as and needed to kind of like plug the gaps with the sort of additional requirements we have.
Brilliant. Just on that point, I saw a question coming in from Sarah, one of the attendees, saying, as you're working on your own IP, how do you choose your designers, especially character designers?
So we have a sort of full-time design team that we, I mean, I don't know how sort of well people that are watching this know kind of how game design breaks down. There tends to be there's a bit of a spectrum. And on one side of it, you have technical design who work very, very, very closely with code. Often they're making tools. They're kind of assisting on sort of like the pipeline that'll help other people do it. And then you kind of move across and you've got system designers who are working on stuff like the game mechanics, who may be literally spending, you know, if you work for Nintendo, you may be spending 3 years getting Mario's jump just absolutely right. And that's the stuff that just makes a game play brilliantly. And then you have level designers that are actually sort of controlling the flow of action, what it is the player does, helping the artist build the spaces and kind of dealing with the sort of the drama of it. And then some studios also then alongside that have narrative designers that are working really fundamentally on player experience, on how the story is delivered, the sort of narrative flow of it. And even bigger companies, those specialisms kind of break down even further. So when you're starting a project, you're looking at how, say, mechanically complex it is, which will determine the ratio, say, of systems designers against level designers. If it's particularly kind of story focused, there may be more drift over to more sort of level designers or narrative designers. It kind of changes project by project. And one of the things that you sort of have to do as a studio is balance the skills and experience within your design team to make sure you've got a sort of a pretty flexible degree of people that can be assigned to the projects that you've got going on. But it also means for people that are sort of like entering into game design as a career or are looking to transfer across to game design as a career, then kind of understanding where you might sit within that spectrum of roles is quite an important thing to do. If you are someone who has coding skills, who is very technically orientated, technical designers are harder to find often than level designers. You probably want to gear yourself in that direction. It's a really good route into the industry. If you're not very technical, then your entry role into the games industry is going to be down the level design route, where you're learning scripting, you're building your sort of technical skills, and you're working in engines like Unity or Unreal to kind of like place things out and use blueprints and things like that. And I think the last thing that's worth saying on that, particularly on the design perspective, is that an awful lot of designers get into the industry through QA, which is quality assurance, which is effectively sort of complex testing. And when you're doing QA, one of the things that you are looking at is really breaking a game into 1,000 pieces and putting it back together again, and developing a very, very strong understanding of how games are made and put together. And it gives you a really good exposure into what sort of works or not. And an awful lot of people that work in design in the industry have come through that QA route. So it's something that people that are transferring across or are looking for a role in the games industry, it's definitely worth looking at that as well, because often the barrier to entry, even at a junior design level, is fairly high. There's sort of an expectation, if you haven't done a very specific college course, that you'll have direct kind of industry experience or building experience. So if you don't have that, looking at QA roles is quite a good way of looking at another route through.
Brilliant. That's so helpful. Thank you. Because I know that there is a lot of interest from people with transferable skills who want to move into the games industry. And the next question I was going to ask really was sort of what you look for when hiring for people with transferable skills. And I think that was really sort of insightful around the sort of the QA route. But for other roles that you hire for, are there sort of particular things you look for people with transferable skills, or any advice that you have for someone who's thinking of maybe taking those next steps and want to think about a strategic way to do that?
Sure. I mean, so it's probably good to understand the different roles within development and the kind of areas that it breaks down into. The sort of, I guess, the simplest way of doing it is you have design, art, production, and code. And within those, you have the different roles. If you want to go into programming, then you need to have either C# or C++ experience for pretty much most modern game engines. That's going to be it. If you're working in Unity, it's going to be C#. If it's Unreal, it's going to be C++. That's the kind of given. If you don't have C++ or C# skills, get them before you start talking to games companies. Unless it's sort of, obviously this is different if it's stuff like apps and things like that, which is not something we do, then there's sort of like other things going on there. But those are the core things for that. For art, you're going to need to be using kind of, I guess, a sort of fairly expected level of stuff, Maya or 3ds Max, Photoshop, Blender. It's relatively quick to kind of do a bit of research and get what are the core technologies that are used in game art production for that. It tends to be quite technical. I think although we'd expect artists to have strong fine art skills and ability to do it, you also are going to be working in a software package, even if you're doing concept art increasingly, which is, sort of like, particularly we get a lot of applications from people that are being illustrators, even digital illustrators, and they're looking to move across the concept art. There is still a fair degree of engine work involved in that, because often we're doing paint overs and block outs of 3D spaces and things like that. So definitely understand the technology that will be worked with by the studios you're applying to. It's relatively easy to find out the kinds of engines and tech they've been using to build their games, and really being able to show some proficiency in those. And if you're coming across and you don't have that direct experience, usually the thing which definitely for art, without question, the first thing we look at is a portfolio above anything else. If we're looking at potential 3D artists, we'll go straight to the portfolio, and that will come in before education or qualifications. So anything you can do to show practical ability, I think, is really, really important. And for art, I think the best advice I can give for that is to, as well as showing finished pieces, is to show process. If you're putting stuff on ArtStation, then show your sort of like finished environment or character or whatever it is you've been working on, and then include some development shots in that, so sort of like it helps us see under the hood of how you built something. Because often you're likely to be asked to do a test, whether that's a code test or an art test or whatever it is. And if it took you, if you've made something, extraordinary, but it's taken you 6 months to do it, you're going to struggle in a game development environment where it's so fast moving. Actually, we're looking at people that can kind of create at pace. So being able to understand how you get to a finished thing is there. And it's also not necessarily about being able to sort of like produce the Sistine Chapel, that especially if you're transferring in, you're going to be coming in probably to, even if you've got a lot of skills from your previous role, you are going to drop down towards a more sort of junior role while you learn the very, very specific aspects of development. So no one's expecting people to come in like completely kind of fully formed genius level. So don't be afraid if you've got stuff to learn and to talk about that stuff. What we're more interested in is people that clearly demonstrate an aptitude and an ability to learn and develop and to take on those kind of skills as well.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I've seen we've got a lot of questions coming in, and I really want to make sure that we cover them all. But what I'll probably do now is just make sure I've asked all my questions. Sorry. Oh, actually, I did have one final question, sorry, which was when we were talking about sort of people applying to Chinese Room specifically, is there anything that you look for that you think sets candidates apart? We're asked that all the time from job seekers. What is that studio looking for that I can put in my application or put in my portfolio that would perhaps set me apart from, you know, I know that you will get a lot of applications. So if you could perhaps cover that, that would be really helpful. And to everyone who's put questions in the chat, I've made a note of them and I'm going to cover as many as I can. So bear with us.
Okay, I think so. There are a lot more people looking for jobs in the games industry than there are jobs in the games industry. And there are more and more and more graduates coming out every year who are being prepped specifically for the games industry. So competition is really, really big. So it's kind of a bit of a truism. It counts for any job application you're making, but it will absolutely count for game studios, and particularly for kind of the sort of smaller or mid-sized game studios. Is we're going to be looking for people that fit the studio culture. So don't be disheartened if you don't get a job, even if you've got the skills, because it might just be that the way you present yourself doesn't fit the studio culture. And that doesn't mean to say you presented yourself wrong. Different studios have different studio cultures, and understanding, doing your research about the studio, how they go about making games, what sort of games they're making, what seem to be their sort of like their passions or their interests, and tailoring your application to that specific studio. So when we're looking at a covering letter or when we're looking at a CV, we're looking at it of going, does this person fit within us? Not just, is this person a good, you know, X type designer or artist, but will this person fit within our team, fit within our culture? Do they show the same? Are they interested in the sort of stuff we're interested in? That doesn't necessarily mean to say that you have to like the games we make. I think there is one of the things you learn when you've been in the industry a little while is there is a big difference often between the games you like playing and the games you like making. And that's okay. But there has to be, you're sort of demonstrating that you have chosen that studio for a particular reason, and you can sell to the studio why you fit their development environment. Nothing gets you kicked into the long grass faster than, even if someone's got the skills and you read it, you just think, this is one of 500 applications that have been sent out to every single studio in the world. And of course you have to do that. And, you know, we get sort of cold approaches all the time. But the stuff which rises to the top is when people have those skills, they have those things you're looking for, and they can also talk about specifically why they want to work for you. So do your research. And there are, you know, even in bigger studios, there are people at the end of the application process that are reading your covering letters, that are looking at your stuff. So don't think you're applying to a corporation. Assume you are talking to specific individual recruiters. And the more you can kind of have that contact, because there are people that we also go back to that don't make it across the sort of threshold, or we can't give them a job this time around. We have people working for us that we've gone back to 6 months later and gone, now we need this. You were really, really close this time around. We really liked you. We'd like to talk to you again or hire you at this point as well. So don't see it as being fire and forget. Develop those relationships with the studios and those recruiters, because you're in it sort of for the long game.
And I think, if I may just add one thing to that I think is really important, when studios talk about culture, they don't mean that they want cookie cutter employees who all think the same and act the same. And I know that studios like the Chinese Room do a lot to sort of improve diversity and you know, the different lived experiences and the different things that everyone can bring to enrich your studio. So I think you know, I know that the Chinese Room do a lot around that, and you've run schemes yourself to try and improve the pipeline of talent coming into the industry. So I would say, if it's okay, I would just sort of echo what you were saying around, you know, culture is really important, but culture doesn't mean cookie cutter. It means what you bring to that culture.
Absolutely. No, it's not. And it is also, you know, I think it's a two-way street, and that's really important as well, that you might want the job, but you also want to be working somewhere that you want to be working. Making games is really, really, really tough. It's a difficult job. It's very, very intense. So being somewhere where not only you fit the studio, but the studio fits you, and you're doing whatever you can during the recruitment process, from doing initial research on the studio through to interview. It's also an opportunity for you to be going, do I want to work here? Is this somewhere where I feel I will fit? Because if you're going to be making a game somewhere for a year, 2 years, and you don't like it, you won't last in the industry very long. And both the industry may be missing out on talent, but also you'd be maybe missing out on a career. So it's really important that you're also understanding what you need and what you want, and you're asking the right questions of the studio. What are the opportunities for career progression? You know, how do I measure how well I'm doing? How does line management, mentorship, what training and learning and development opportunities do I have? These are all really valid questions to be asking. And they're also impressive questions to be asking. When someone comes and they're asking those questions to us, we're seeing someone who has got initiative, who wants to be in the future, who wants to be in the industry long term, is looking for personal growth and professional growth. These are good things. So don't be afraid of presenting as someone who is on a trajectory and wants to know where you can take them on that trajectory. I think you should absolutely be asking that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dan. That was really, really insightful. So thank you for that.